שאמות משהו ממני, משהו ממני ימות בך, ימות בך. כשתמות משהו ממך בי, משהו ממך בי ימות איתך, ימות איתך. כי כולנו, כן כולנו, כולנו רקמה אנושית אחת חיה, ואם אחד מאיתנו הולך מעימנו, משהו מת בנו, משהו נשאר איתו. אם נדע איך להרגיע את האיבה, אם רק נדע להשקיט את זמנו על חרבוננו, לומר סליחה, אם נדע להתחיל מההתחלה. כי כולנו, כן כולנו, כולנו רקמה אנושית אחת חיה, ואם אחד מאיתנו הולך מעימנו, משהו מת בנו, משהו נשאר איתו. נשאר איתו. תחת השמיים לכל זמן ולכל for birth and a time for death, a time to plant and a time to uproot the planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to tear and a time to build. La
ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך ותקננו בעצה טובה מלפניך והושיענו למען שמך והגן בעדנו והסר מעלינו אויב דבר וחרב ורב ויגון והסר שטן מלפנינו ובצל כנפיך תסתירנו כי אל שומרנו ומצילנו אתה ובצל כנפיך תסתירנו כי אל שומרנו ומצילנו אתה כי אל מלך חנון ורחום אתה ושבור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם ועד עולם.
When I wake up in America, I see my name others there, with every kind of clothes and shoes, hats and skin and hair, every fine belief and custom, scores of songs from who knows where. When I wake up in America, our stories fill the air. Wake up, wake up, wake up in America. The light in the harbor, it shines for us all. When I wake up in America, when I wake up in America, I hold my head up high, and I find my way as others do, beneath the same big sky. I recite the Pledge of Allegiance in a voice both clear and strong. When I wake up in America, I'm right where I belong. Wake up, wake up, wake up in America. The light in the harbor, it shines for us all. When I wake up in America, see the kids playing, happily swaying. Good to be staying in this sacred place with every faith and race. When I wake up in America, I put away my fear, and I love my neighbor as myself, and I say, I'm glad you're here. We have found ourselves together in this land we dreamed could be. If we wake up America, everybody still can be free. Oh, wake up, wake up, wake up in America. The light in the harbor, it shines for us all. When I wake up, when you wake up, if we wake up, please wake up, America.
Hello, neshama, neshama, shenatata bi, neshama, neshama, shenatata bi, Neshama, neshama.
Hello everyone. Crazy times, huh? On March 11th, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. And it seems as if the world has come to a screeching halt. And in times like these, it's natural for everyone to be anxious and scared. and not really sure of the future. There's a song that got us through one period in time, and I believe that same song can get us through this period. So from my family, the aliens, and myself, we just simply want to say, hold on, let's keep each other in prayer. And at the end of this, we can say we use this time to reset, to relax, and to recalibrate and become more connected with the community. It's such a beautiful thing. I've seen more of my neighbors in these last few weeks than I've ever seen. So hold on, and we'll get through this together.
We shall overcome. We shall
Psalm 96, page 5 of the Shabbat program, Let the Heavens Be Glad. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for opening this special Shabbat service with these words from the Jewish Bible, from different sections of the Bible, which express what we hope we deeply feel the themes of some of what this Shabbat are all about. This Shabbat, we observe many different things, and I want to start by kind of giving us a frame for this Shabbat, which is, of course, on the weekend of Martin Luther King Day, so we call this our Martin Luther King Day Shabbat every year. But connected to the Martin Luther King Day Shabbat every year, and this particular Shabbat, which is Parshat Shemot, is the 50th yortzeit of the death of Abraham Joshua Heschel. And Heschel's yortzeit and Martin Luther King Day often are very close together, not always, given the differences between the Jewish and the English calendar. But this year it seems particularly moving that both the yortzeit of the yortzeit of Heschel and Heschel's birthday are also in this season, right around this weekend of Martin Luther King Day Shabbat. In thinking about how to frame this Shabbat and how to go into this Shabbat service, I want to first of all encourage us to eliminate, to drop, to get rid of the memes, the superficial images that we have of Dr. King and of Rabbi Heschel. That's the first thing that we have to do. There is somebody who says that we should stop listening and reading the speech, the I Have a Dream speech, so that finally maybe Americans would start reading something else that Dr. King has written or said. The same thing with Heschel. There's so much richness in both of these men, and significantly, they had a profound relationship between them. So tonight we hope we will, if I can encourage you to drop the memes and drop the superficial images and the two-dimensional reductions of both of them, and be open to exploring, and maybe in your life seeing yourself tonight as beginning to go into the depths of what both of these deep thinkers, social activists, and deeply religious men have to teach us, even to this day, 50 years after Rabbi Dr. Heschel died. Now, he died on his yahrzeit was on the 18th of Tevet, and his birthday was on the 29th of Tevet, so very close together. And they were this weekend of the Parsha of Shemot, of Exodus. So on this weekend, we have the Parsha which opens the book of Exodus, which is right with the yahrzeit and the birthday of Heschel, and the birthday and the federal holiday, which took decades to achieve, of Dr. King. So we have this Parsha, which begins the story of the Exodus from Egypt, with, of course, the description of going into slavery, and then the Exodus from Egypt, which becomes the fundamental story of Dr. King, and we celebrate all of them in this Shabbat. So if there's anything that you bring away from tonight's service, and I hope there will be many different kinds of things, I hope you will run home and read and watch and deepen your relationship with both of these prophets of the 20th century. Rabbi Heschel died at the age of 65. At the end of December of 1972, it's the 50th anniversary now because, of course, we observe the Hebrew date, which is this week. In his last, he had heart issues and he had a heart attack, which he died in his sleep on that Shabbat of Parshat Shemot. So for Jews around the world who care about Rabbi Heschel, Parshat Shemot is deeply connected with losing Rabbi Dr. Heschel. So through tonight's service, if you have never heard of him before, I hope you'll be inspired by him. If you've heard about him, but you only have a superficial understanding, I hope it'll get deeper. And I hope wherever you are with your connection to Rabbi Heschel, it'll get even deeper. The two men, Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King, had in many ways some parallel biographies. Rabbi Heschel was the son, the grandson, the great-grandson of a brilliant dynasty of Hasidic rabbis in Poland, mostly in Warsaw, but not only in Warsaw. Dr. King was the son and grandson of very important Baptist preachers in the South. Both were inheriting profound traditions of their own people, and both took it to places that nobody could have imagined. And these are not superficial places, and they're places that both challenge and inspire. They first met in 1963 at a conference, and I want to begin tonight's service with a little piece of them as we go into the service itself. They first met at a 1963 conference on religion and race that President Kennedy called to the White House. And Dr. King knew of Rabbi Heschel for one reason, because a book that Rabbi Heschel had written, this is my copy of the book, called The Prophets, was a very, very precious book to Dr. King. In his own copy of The Prophets, he and Ralph Abernathy and Andrew Young all had their own copies of Rabbi Heschel's book, The Prophets. And Andrew Young has said that Dr. King's volume of The Prophets there were marginalia, underlining comments, because it was in his book on the prophets, which was a published version of his PhD thesis from 1935 in Berlin, that Rabbi Heschel explored the profound truth of what the biblical Jewish prophets have to teach. You can see how old my version of it is. I discovered Heschel when I was 15 years old as a teenager, and he, along with the Psalms, have done the most to shape my religious life. So at the conference that President Kennedy called, and of course he had some reasons to call this conference in 1963, in the spring of 1963, and that was to prevent a march from happening a few months later. That was not successful. But this is the telegram that Rabbi Heschel wrote to John F. Kennedy in the White House. This is the telegram. I have to take off my glasses to read. To President John F. Kennedy, the White House, June 16, 1963. I look forward to the privilege of being present at meeting tomorrow at 4 p.m. Likelihood exists that Negro problem will be like the weather. Everybody talks about it, but nobody does anything about it. Please demand of religious leaders personal involvement, not just solemn declaration. We forfeit the right to worship God as long as we continue to humiliate Negroes. Church and synagogues have failed. They must repent. Ask of religious leaders to call for national repentance and personal sacrifice. Let religious leaders donate 1 month's salary toward fund for Negro housing and education. I propose that you, Mr. President, declare a state of moral emergency in the United States. Call for a Marshall Plan for aid to Negroes is becoming a necessity. The hour calls for high moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. That was a telegram. For those of you who don't remember telegrams, those were expensive. These were not emails that were free. You had to pay for every character. 1963. So let us remember those words of calling for high moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. Rabbi Heschel's daughter, Susanna Heschel, then wrote a book, edited a book, which if you want one volume to get for your reading, quoting that telegram, she did a compilation of his essays in this book called Moral Grandeur and Spiritual Audacity, a reference to that telegram. So tonight, we celebrate these two men. We'll explore their relationship, their friendship, what both of them tried to do and in some cases failed. And most of all, we will not see them as two-dimensional creatures, but celebrate them not for what they did way back when, but for the constant demand of us to pray more deeply and to act more firmly. So I'd now like to invite anybody who's new to CBST, if this is your first time here, to introduce yourself before we light these Shabbat candles. So is there anybody here for the first time? Please let us know your name and where you're from.
My name is Elad Schechter. I'm coming from Jerusalem.
Elad Schechter from Jerusalem. Welcome. Welcome. So happy to have you from Jerusalem. So happy that you're here. Anybody else in this section? How about up there in this section? Anybody new? New to CBST or new to our space?
My name is Grace.
Grace. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you. I now live in Queens.
In Queens. Where are you from before Queens?
California.
California.
Recently, Massachusetts.
Welcome. Wonderful to have you, Grace. Anybody else? Anybody over here? Yes. Oh, Max Leader is back from a month. Yay! Welcome back, Max. Max has been in Australia and New Zealand, right? So happy to have you back. Anybody else? Did I get everybody? Well, we want to welcome everybody to CBST, those who have been here a long time and those who are here for the first time. We're really happy to be together tonight. And so I'd like to invite anybody who's here for the first time, even those up there, Max, even you come on down to light our Shabbos candles. As we light the candles, the blessing is on page 38. We'll do the blessing, you just do the lighting. Grace, you too.
Baruch אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו להדליקם של שבת.
Thank you so much. And please stand if you are able as we welcome angels of peace to be among us. Sit down, wish good Shabbos to everyone around, welcome someone you don't know, introduce yourself to someone new. Shabbat Shalom. Page 52.
Shabbat.
lower part of the page. What is so luminous about a day? What is so precious to captivate the hearts? It is because the seventh day is a mine where the Spirit's precious metal can be found with which to construct the palace in time, a dimension in which the human is at home with the divine, a dimension in which we aspire to approach the likeness of the divine. Page 62, please stand in body or spirit. Please be seated. Read with me on the bottom of page 59. The beginning of prayer is praise. The power of worship is song. To worship is to join the cosmos in praising God. Prayer is meaningless unless it is subversive, unless it seeks to overthrow and to ruin the pyramids of callousness, hatred, opportunism, falsehoods. The liturgical movement must become a revolutionary movement, seeking to overthrow the forces that continue to destroy the promise, the hope, the vision. Page 66, L'cha Dodi.
Te
In the 1950s, as a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary, Rabbi Heschel wrote and spoke a lot about the problem of American synagogue Judaism. And in those essays, he said too often, synagogues were the place where prayer came to die. And that our job as Jews is to understand the power of genuine and deep prayer. And I quote him, "Mindfulness of God rises slowly, a thought at a time. Suddenly, we are there. Or, is God right here at the margin of our soul? When we begin to feel a qualm of diffidence lest we hurt what is holy, lest we break what is whole, then we discover that God is not austere. God answers our love with trembling awe. To pray is to take notice of the wonder of being alive. To regain the sense of the mystery that animates all beings, the divine margin in all attainments. Prayer is our answer. Prayer is our humble answer to the inconceivable surprise of living. If there is anything that has animated me in my years as rabbi at CBST, in my dream of building a prayer life, it is Heschel's understanding of the role of exaltation in prayer, that there should be joy in prayer. That's not the conservative synagogue I grew up with in the 1960s. My synagogue was a 50s, 60s synagogue. But to capture in prayer a sense of joy and the wonder of being, and to appreciate that we can infuse the sense of divine into all of us. If any of you have learned a drop of that from me, you have learned Abraham Joshua Heschel's some of his deepest teaching. With gratitude, we turn to the psalm for Shabbat, Tov Lahodot. How grateful we are. Oh, and we are doing, the setting we're doing tonight, thank you, Joyce, is Debbie Friedman's setting for Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat, because this is the season also of her Yortzeit. So we remember Debbie with great love and gratitude and deep sadness. That was Debbie's last composition before she died. Page 78, please rise in body or spirit for the Baruch Hu.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
Please be seated. Page 80 and 81. Individually to the asterisk.
מעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני. המעריב ערבים,
Page 86.
אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות, חוקים משפטים, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, שוכבנו וקומנו, נשיח בחקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגד יומם ולילה, יומם ולילה. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני. אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננת על לבניך, ודיברת בם בשיטתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם מאוד על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
We continue with the final two paragraphs of the Shema to ourselves, ending on page 92 or 93.
אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Michael Walzer, who is a political philosopher at Princeton University, wrote a lot of books of political philosophy and political theory. He wrote one small book about the Bible, taking his knowledge and interpretations of political philosophy to the book of Exodus. And that is the book we are beginning this week in the reading of the cycle of our lectionary, of how we read the Bible. And in this book, which he called Exodus and Revolution, as a political theorist, he analyzed the story of Exodus as the story of political liberation and examined it through the lens of a political theorist, not a biblical scholar. But his final chapter of the book changes tone quite dramatically because it then becomes quite personal. How do we move out of places of slavery and degradation and oppression, as is told in the story of the book of Exodus, and how do we move out of those places to places of freedom and of liberation and of community and of purpose? And he said, as he ends the book, he says that there are three things that we need to remember, that wherever we go, Egypt will go with us. There will always be oppression and evil and hard times. But we need to always remember that there is a promised land, that there is something to move toward, and that the only way to get from here to there, to move through the desert, is to do it together by joining hands and marching together. So Noah Aronson took a poem adapted from Michael Walzer's words, and on page 5, we sing this song, Standing on the Parted Shores of History, based on these words of Michael Walzer. Exodus and Revolution.
Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught. Before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it's eternally Egypt. That there's a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there's no way to get from here to there, except by joining hands and marching together. גאל ישראל.
Page 6 in the program and 98 in the Siddur. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom. Heschel wrote, "My father was a unique combination of a Hasidic voice of compassion and mercy, always seeing the goodness in other people, and a prophetic voice of justice, denouncing hypocrisy, self-centeredness, and indifference. My father was never interested in assigning blame or claiming victimhood, but as the Bible does, he showed us a vision of who we might become. His was a voice of inspiration, not argumentation rooted in Jewish religious thought. What he once wrote of Eastern European Jews applies to him as well. Jewishness was not in the fruit, but in the sap that stirred through the tissues of the tree, bred in the silence of the soil. It ascended to the leaves to become eloquent in the fruit. So too Jewishness infused my father like the sap of his tree, and his eloquence was the fruit of his Jewish piety and learning. Words," he wrote, "are sacred. God's tools for creating the universe and our tools for bringing holiness or evil into the world. He used to remind us that the Holocaust did not begin with the building of crematoria, and Hitler did not come to power with tanks and guns. It all began with words, with defamation, with language and propaganda. Words create worlds," he used to tell me when I was a child. "They must be used very carefully. Some words once having been uttered gain eternity and can never be withdrawn. The book of Proverbs remind us," he wrote, "that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let us mean these words. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, please God be with us. Let us mean these words. Shabbat Shalom, may you be blessed with peace. Let us mean these words. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms."
ברוך אתה אדוני הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל כל העמים ועל ירושלים.
Page 102, please rise in body or spirit. Page 104, followed by our silence prayer time. And this time is for you as you need it, and take it the way that's meaningful for you.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה ועלמא דברה קילותי וימליך מלכותי וחייכון וביום נכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב וימרו וישתבח ויתפאר וירמם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמד קודשה ברכו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה
Page 6 of our program. These words by Dr. King. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. With a setting by Dave Rowe.
I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden
Mishaberach imotenu Sarah, Rivka, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, Vizilpa, Vavotenu, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. May the Holy One who has blessed our ancestors bless and heal all those who are ill today. Bless those who are suffering from illnesses of the body, or illnesses of the mind, or illnesses of the soul. Tonight we hold in our hearts for healing Harry Alberts, Cecile Bazelon, Jasmine Berman, Ruthie Berman, Holly Blair Cassio, Perry Klein, Julian Collins, Annika Cooper, Stephen Fisher, Myra Jaffe Galst, Steve Kodik, Josh Lair, Bill Leipzig, Eileen Levin, Barbara Monis, Larry Nelson, Sue Rosansky, Bill Rosenblum, Rick Redder, Yona Rezpa, Paulo Sanseverino, Terry Tomola, Chaya Batzvi Vibatya, Eliezer ben Sarah, Mordechai ben Nachman Ubela Rivka, Sephora bat Perel, Yaakov ben Golda Ushlomo. Please say out loud any other names for whom we're praying for healing tonight. El na rafana la, El na rafana lahem. Please, God, bless all those who are ill among the Jewish people and among the world. And may those who will not be healed on this earth be blessed with nights free from suffering and days filled with peace. May all who are ill be surrounded by the love of friends, loving companions, families, and communities. And let us say, Amen. Prayer for our country. On page 8 of the program, and in honor of this day, as you know, if anybody has been to Dr. King's tomb in Atlanta, the words that are in this prayer for our country are inscribed on his tomb that end this prayer. This was one of his favorite quotes from the book of Amos that ends the second half of this prayer. Source of all life, join me. Guide our leaders with righteousness, strengthen their hearts, but keep them from hardening, that they may use their influence and authority to speak truth and act for justice. May all who dwell in this country share in its bounty, enjoy its freedoms, and be protected by its laws. May this nation use its power and wealth to be a voice for justice, peace, and equality for all who dwell on earth. May we be strong and have courage, to be bold in our action and deep in our compassion, to discern when we must listen and when we must act, to uproot bigotry, intolerance, misogyny, racism, discrimination, and violence in all its forms, to celebrate the many faces of God reflected in the wondrous diversity of humanity, to welcome the stranger and the immigrant, and to honor the gifts of those who seek refuge and possibility here as they have since before this nation was born. Let justice well up like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And let us say, Amen. Page 138.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברה קילותי וימליך מלכותי בחיי חונה וימי חונה וחי לכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעלם ולעלם בעלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה ברכו לאלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן תרכב צרות הון ובעוד הון לכל ישראל קודם אבוהון וישמעיה ואמרו אמן יהי שלום רב מן שמעיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן עושה שלום ממרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody online. Thank you for being with us tonight. So, in this week's Parsha, which begins this book of the book of Exodus, or Shemot, it is the beginning of the story that becomes what we call the Exodus story itself, right? This is where the Israelites are enslaved, and the rest of the book is about the Israelites struggling for freedom, and the 4 books that follow the book of Genesis are all about the story from being enslaved to escaping slavery, and then struggling through the wilderness. So this story, which we call the Exodus story in all different theologies, as some of you have heard me talk about before, was central to Dr. King's theology. In Christianity, there are many different ways to approach God's revelation. There's the Easter theology, which is all about the ability to have a second chance and rebirth. But for Dr. King and for the African American church, the Exodus theology was the central biblical story. Not the stories found in the Christian New Testament, but the stories of the Exodus, which are found in the Jewish Bible itself. Now, it didn't start with Dr. King, of course. One could say that enslaved Africans here in this country look to the Exodus stories, and you can see elements of it throughout the experience of slavery here in the United States. But Dr. King did take it to an entirely different level. And he spoke on multiple occasions about the power of identifying with the children of Israel, of the story of the book of Exodus and of the Exodus stories, gave deep strength to him and faith for overcoming the adversity of being victims to the Jim Crow laws and to the oppression found, as Dr. King repeatedly said, not only in the former Confederate states, in which Jim Crow laws were legal forms of discrimination, but likewise the evils of racism in northern cities. And often in the telling of Dr. King Day, we leave out the criticisms that he had, especially after 1965, of the northern racism and the racism in the northern states, especially in the cities, in which huge populations of African Americans found themselves. But he said over and over again in his writings that understanding the story of Exodus wasn't just to have a theoretical concept of the escape from slavery to freedom. And I think this is really important for those of us modern people who didn't necessarily, or might be somewhat uncomfortable with talk of faith and of God, have to understand. Religion done right offers incredible power to people who are in the most difficult times. And this is something you've heard from me in so many different ways as we're facing the tsunamis of hate that are coming toward us. The faith that Dr. King talked about in identifying with the children of Israel, B'nai Yisrael, of the story of the book of Shemot, of Exodus, which we're starting now, wasn't just because it was a good story that could parallel the story of African Americans. But the faith of the children of Israel gave him the ability to offer faith to his people. If he is a Moses to his people, the story he's offering them is that it's happened before. People have been oppressed. People have been enslaved for hundreds of years, and people kept working through terrible oppression and got through to the other side. This was so powerful to him, not just because it was the story of Pharaoh, but because it was the story of the children of Israel surviving. In that conference I mentioned in 1963 when they met, Heschel began the conference with a Dvar Torah, of course. And he used a Torah teaching from this week's Parsha. And I'll read a brief portion of it today. I could speak, and some of you were in, I taught a class on Heschel some years ago. You know I could talk about Heschel for a long time. But I'll read just briefly from his Dvar Torah opening this conference on religion and race, in which Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel met and started this very profound relationship they had until Dr. King's assassination only 5 years later. And these are Heschel's words. At the first conference on religion and race, which is not the one we're gathered at today, the main participants were Pharaoh and Moses. Moses' words were, "Thus says the Lord, God of Israel, let my people go that they may celebrate a feast to me." Pharaoh, at this first conference on religion and race, retorted, "Who is the Lord that I should heed this voice and let Israel go? I do not know this Lord. I will not let Israel go." The outcome of that summit meeting has not come to an end to this day. Pharaoh is still not ready to capitulate. The Exodus began, but it is far from having been completed. There's much more, but I'll stop with that so you get a sense of Heschel. He also had a great sense of humor and was able to make the Bible actually deeply connected to the moments of today. So who was Heschel? He was born in 1907 in Warsaw, in Poland. As I mentioned earlier, he was part of a dynasty on both sides of his family, both his mother and his father, of some of the most important Hasidic dynasties in Poland. He grew up surrounded, enriched, completely steeped in this kind of religious life. But like much of Europe of that time, the Jewish community wasn't so bifurcated that if you were deeply religious like that, you wouldn't also get a PhD at a university. And so he left in the early 30s to go to Berlin, which was the intellectual capital of Europe, to pursue a PhD at the University of Berlin, arriving there in the early 30s. Great timing, huh? So in that time, and there's much written about this, which I'll have to do ellipses here, he went and studied with some of the greatest minds in Germany. Many of them were Jewish professors to get his PhD, which resulted in his PhD thesis, which was on the prophets. But of course, at the same time that he was writing his thesis on the prophets, the German church was beginning to capitulate to Nazism. And he watched around him as the religious institutions of the Protestant church in Germany became Nazified, quite literally. Anybody who objected to the Nazi regime, and by the way, this is long before World War II, right? This is before there's violence. This is, the church quickly capitulates, and anybody who speaks out against the Nazi government is released from the church and replaced with somebody who is a Nazi-identified religious leader. Heschel is really aware of what's happening to the religious church, to the religious community in Berlin and all of Germany, and has many colleagues because he is a graduate student and very deeply enmeshed in this world of religious thinkers at the highest level, beseeches his colleagues to start making statements and to not identify with Nazi Germany, and almost none agree to that. Jewish professors, as we know, in this period of time, lose their positions, and it becomes impossible for Heschel to publish his thesis, which would give him the PhD. And then, of course, in October of 1938, all Polish-born Jews are deported out of Germany and forced to go back to Poland, and a gruesome, brutal deportation. You've heard about this before. Rick and I have spoken about it because, of course, 1 month later is Kristallnacht. But the first step towards Kristallnacht is the deportation of foreign Jews. German Jews could stay, but Polish-born Jews, and there were a lot because, like Heschel, moving back and forth and going to Germany to go get his PhD, that was not an unusual thing to do. Heschel moved back to Warsaw, which an amazing story that I won't go into now, where he becomes very involved in the Yiddish poetry world and teaches in the Polish Jewish community there, and this is now 1938, going into 1939. And it's becoming more and more clear that the world is collapsing, and harder for Jews in Poland to leave. Easier for Jews in Germany, actually, in that period to be able to get out. And then in 1939, Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, the Reform Movement's college, managed to get 5 visas to get Jewish scholars out of Europe. No more, but they got 5 visas. The visas had limitations on them. They couldn't bring families. They could only be solo visas. And so HUC had this very difficult task of figuring out who they could get out of Europe. This is in the summer of 1939. In July of 1939, Heschel, because he was not married and did not have children, got one of those visas, and HUC, the Reform Movement, brought Heschel 6 weeks before the invasion and the beginning of World War II. Heschel got out of Europe. His mother and his sisters, his father had predeceased him at that point, but his mother and sisters were still in Warsaw. He was never to be able to get them out, and they were murdered. Heschel went to HUC in Cincinnati, where he was they gave him a room in the student dormitory, and one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century survived because of the generosity and thoughtfulness. They had to actually change paperwork to make sure that Heschel could even fit under that visa. For the entirety of the war, Heschel worked as hard as he could to get his mother and sisters and many, many friends and other relatives out of Europe. He was horrified at the silence of the Jewish community here in the United States and horrified at the silence of the government here in order to try and do more to bring refugees into the United States. And for the first couple of years, it was possible, if people could have a visa, to come into the United States. At a certain point, it became virtually impossible. He tells a story that he was, of course, Shomer Shabbat and very religious. He would turn on the radio before Shabbat began every week so that he could be listening to the news all through Shabbat, because he just was so desperate to find out something good about his mother and his sisters and his close friends there. The war ends. He finds out that his mother and sisters have been killed. And in 1944, and some of you have heard me read this, and I just want to read this again. So he still, at this point, doesn't know what happened to his family yet. In 1944, he writes an essay called Toward a Just Society, and I just read a sentence from it. The fascists have shown that they are great in evil. Let us reveal that we can be as great in goodness. 1944. After the war, he moves back to New York. He had spent the summers in New York, and he gets a position at JTS. JTS now likes to tell the story that Heschel was so much happier at JTS than HUC, that HUC was not a comfortable fit for him, and it wasn't entirely a comfortable fit for him. The students were at quite a different level. They weren't really interested in his thinking, but JTS really didn't know what to do with him. They put him in the Department of Education. They never gave him a graduate assistant until 20 years after he started. He was treated very badly because JTS just wasn't into mysticism and chassidut and talking about prayer. It was not seen as legitimate scholarly research, so to speak. So while Heschel was at JTS for many years, he was treated as a little bit of a anomaly and not really so well treated. Now, of course, JTS has tons of things about Heschel. And this weekend we'll be doing a lot of wonderful programs, by the way, about Heschel, which is good. And by the way, they're fantastic programs. But in any case, through the 50s, Heschel starts to write and write and write. And he starts to see, in 1955, a 26-year-old African-American minister becomes the voice and face of the Montgomery bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. And he starts to hear this young black minister speaking. Now remember, he's the expert on the Jewish prophets. And he begins to hear this young 26-year-old minister sounding like the prophets he had been studying and writing about. He didn't see that anywhere in the Jewish world, but he started to see what was happening in the African-American church in profound contrast to what was happening in Jewish synagogues, which seemed flat and insipid and not relevant to people's lives and not speaking truth to power. He started to experience the black church as being the place where his understanding of religious, ecstatic prayer could exist. And he, by the way, is an intellectual. He is not a Hasidic, neo-Hasidic, everything is about chanting. And then, as I mentioned, in 1963, he meets Dr. King face to face, and they become very, very good friends. In 1965, Bloody Sunday takes place in Selma, Alabama, led by the young John Lewis, who was in his early 20s at that time. And another march takes place, and Dr. King was not at the first march at Bloody Sunday. And Dr. King puts out a message. We need religious leaders here. We need white religious leaders to come to Selma and to risk what the violence of the South is doing. And he reached out directly and specifically to Rabbi Heschel. He said, we need you to be on the front line with us when we try this march again, to march from Selma to Montgomery, which is, of course, the capital, to insist on voting rights for African Americans. And Dr. Heschel describes going down to Alabama and being met by the Jewish community of Alabama when he arrived, of Montgomery, saying to him, please go back north. You will just unleash anti-Semitism. We have to live here. If you create an image of Jewish support for these civil rights activists, you're going to go back to New York. But when you leave, the violence will be directed to us. He describes this very movingly and with a lot of compassion, but of course he stays, and that's where we have the iconic photograph. And Dr. King asked him to march in front near him because they expected so much more violence to happen. And that was 1965. In 1968, in February of 1968, Dr. King is invited by Rabbi Heschel to the Rabbinical Assembly's convention somewhere in the Catskills. And there's a fantastic description of Dr. King speaking to the conservative rabbis of the Rabbinical Assembly. He's given an award, and they get to ask him questions. And he and Rabbi Heschel speak together kind of as in a conversation, and they ask questions. And we know what happened in April of 1968. A few days later, Dr. King was to celebrate the Passover Seder at Rabbi Heschel's house. He was assassinated a few days before that. So this particular Martin Luther King Day is so moving to me because here we have an opportunity to respect and understand they both learned for each other. It wasn't just that Heschel said, I'm praying with my feet. At this point, I am sick of that phrase. Heschel believed in religion as a source of power for making good in the world, but also for the liberation of each of us. He would not believe you should pray only with your feet. In contemporary American Jewish life, it's translated as the most Jewish thing you could do kind of is to go to a demonstration. Now, everybody here knows me. I love a good demonstration. But what I have also received from Heschel is a deep, profound love of prayer and of study and understanding that they can't be separated. And finally, I read the words, the last interview that Rabbi Heschel gave in 1972, 2 weeks before he died. He ended the interview, which was on TV. Can you imagine things like this being on TV now? Like an interview with a... Anyway. And he was asked, what is his message to young people? This is the last thing we have that he said publicly. I would say to young people a number of things. I would say, let them remember that there is meaning beyond absurdity. Let them be sure that every little deed counts, that every word has power, and that we can, everyone, do our share to redeem the world in spite of all the absurdities and all the frustrations and all the disappointments. And above all, remember that the meaning of life is to build a life as if it were a work of art. You're not a machine, and you are young. Start working on this great work of art called your own existence. One of the ways of, a couple of ways of doing it is, one, remember the importance of self-discipline. Second, study the great sources of wisdom. Don't read the bestsellers. And third, and most important maybe, remember that life is a celebration, or can be a celebration. There's much entertainment in our life, and entertainment is destroying much of our initiative. What's really important is life as a celebration. The human being needs exaltation. The human being needs moments of celebration. One of the most important things is to teach human beings how to celebrate. He died 2 weeks later. And let us, in his memory, learn how to celebrate. And let us, in both of their memories, learn how to commit ourselves to the deep internal spiritual work of prayer and of study and of celebration. And let us remember the power of demonstrations as an act of religious expression. And we at CBST turn to these great words now that are in our Siddur on page 214. Page 214. And when my daughter started PS 11 in Brooklyn, and we went to the first assembly at PS 11 in Brooklyn when she was in first grade, the assembly had the American national anthem and the Negro national anthem. Lift every voice and sing. Please stand as we sing this national anthem.
Rejoice.
And please read with me this quote of Heschel's on page 217 in our Martin Luther King Day section. What is the essence of being a prophet? A prophet is a person who holds God and men in one thought at one time at all times. Our tragedy begins with the segregation of God, with the bifurcation of the secular and the sacred. We worry more about the purity of dogma than about the integrity of love. We think of God in the past tense and refuse to realize that God is always present and never past. That God may be more intimately present in slums than in mansions, with those who are smarting under the abuse of the callous. An honest estimation of the moral state of our society will disclose some are guilty, but all are responsible. Page 140, Aleinu. Seated. We pause now, as we do in every service, to remember those we've loved and lost, either in recent days or in this season in years past. We extend our deepest condolences to CBST members Karen Ben Ezra and Rabbi Deborah Megdal on the death of Karen's uncle, Paul Berger, who died on January 4th. To CBST member Lori Spear on the death of her mother, Anita Wasserman, who died on January 12th. We mark the Yortzites tonight of CBST members Harvey Berger, Joseph Freitag, Eugene Riegler, Stephen Siegel, and Scott Gilbert. Family and friends, Freimuth Biller, Leon Podosinski, Selma Winter, Jeanette Green, Owen Rayner, Gloria Gewurz, Adele Passman, Judith Albert, Joyce Dutka, Benjamin Levy, Elaine Moldovan, Saul Moldovan, Dina Ingerman, Jacob Rosenberg, David Namdar, Ethel Klein, and Mildred Sonnenstein. If you are in mourning or observing a Yortzeit, or if it's your custom to stand for the Mourner's Kaddish, please do on page 150. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah, B'alma Devra Krute v'yamlich Malchute, B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayedechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala v'zman Kariv v'yamru, Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Li'olam Ome'el Maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei kudsha brichu le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata ta'miram b'yalma v'yimru Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei Tevel v'yimru. May the one who brings peace in the heavens bring comfort to all who mourn here on earth. And let us say, Amen. And now for some announcements, our president, Sabrina Farber.
Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to CBST. I am so grateful to have so many of you in community tonight, both near and far and via live stream, and what an amazing service that was. We are incredibly lucky. Thank you to our Baal Tefillah, Cantor Sam Rosen, welcome back, and many thanks to Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, also welcome back, for your service leadership and deeply moving drasha. Deep thanks to our music director, Joyce Rosenzweig, and the entire CBST chorus. I'd like a little applause from them right now. Thank you very much. For lifting our prayer and song tonight so very beautifully. We are so grateful. Thanks, of course, to Barbara Friedman for masterfully punctuating our worship. I worked on that for a long time, so you gotta let me know if that worked out or not. Thanks also to our ushers, Lynn and Sally and Bonnie, and thanks to Sharon on chat, and to, I think that's Jason Zivick up there on tech. Jason, is that you? Yes, okay, good. I never know, they never tell me if that changes. Please join us tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for Liberal Minyan. This will be led by Rabbi Kleinbaum and Cantor Rosen. She's very busy this weekend, so if she dashes out after services, that's perfectly fine. Give her a break. And Aleph Bet, Limud, and Teen Track will also take place tomorrow. And after services, join us for a kiddush lunch. You can join us again online for Havdalah tomorrow night with, drumroll please, Rabbi Mike Moskowitz. I'm going to take 1 minute digression here. I was thinking today a lot about the synagogue budget and thinking about how money is always tight. We never have enough. We're always trying to raise more. We're always trying to be creative about it. And I thought I could run a weekly lottery. Guess who's hosting Havdalah? Guess who's leading Havdalah? And everybody would have to vote. Oh, and now I'm wrong. So, okay, I guess that was a bad idea. It's not Rabbi Moskowitz. That's next week. So who is it? So it's Abigail Hopper. All right, well, all right. Obviously, that needs a little bit of work. So I'm going to have to take that idea back to the drawing board and rethink it. Yeah. Anyway, more on that soon. So much for Havdalah. But back to MLK Weekend. Thank you so much for joining us for our MLK Weekend of Service project. There'll be join Repair the World and CBST to package school supply kits for the East Harlem Tutorial Program, which is a fantastic organization that's fighting for racial equity and education justice. There'll be shifts that you can sign on for, both through the CBST website and also through Repair the World. There was a link in the e-news. Yes, it's largely going to be servicing families and kids and be their project. However, there's room and we want to welcome everyone of all ages. They'll be learning throughout the day, and it's going to be a wonderful way to honor Martin Luther King. Before I disappear, and obviously have to practice for next week, I would like to thank everybody for participating in the town hall. It was an extraordinarily gratifying experience, and I want to thank all of you in person, on live stream, wherever you are, for coming and helping us think through this moment where we are as a community. And we are so glad to be on this journey together as a group. And as I said, I will bring this up periodically over time as I come up here and speak to you. Feel free to reach out to me as farber@cbst.org if you have any questions or concerns. I promise you, there'll be a section on the website before too long where you can research and know what's going on, and we promise to keep you updated. Thank you so much to Rabbi Kleinbaum and to the whole board for participating in the breakout sessions. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. And I wanted to point out to folks on page 10 and 11 of the program are some of the writings of Dr. King and Dr. Heschel. If you want to continue learning and studying, please do so. I'm very pleased to say that our teen track, which I'm meeting with tomorrow, is going to the South to do the civil rights trip, and we'll be going to Selma, of course. Some of you were on our adult trip a few years ago. This is our second teen track going to the South. We'll be going on President's Day weekend, February 16th, I think, to 19th, right? Okay, and our, where are they? Here they are. Yeah. Sponsorships. Thank you, Noemi. I couldn't think of that word. Tonight's sponsorship, sponsored by Randy and myself in memory of Randy's father, Gabe Weingarten, who died January 5th, 2020. We miss him daily, particularly his puns and his poetry. By Rabbi Kim Geringer in memory of my mother, that was Randy's father, of Kim's mother, Ida, is that how it's pronounced? Ida May Geringer, on her 11th yahrzeit. She put Judaism into my soul. How beautiful. I think of her and miss her every day. By Jerry Hyman and Mark Cohen in memory of Mark's stepmother, Ann Cohen, who died December 28th, in memory of Nancy Schloss, a great friend for 50 years. May both of their memories be for a blessing. By Ruthie Berman in memory of the passing of my loving, brilliant, extraordinary mother, Jeanette Green, whom I miss very much. By Vicki Passman in memory of my mother, Adele Passman, on her 4th yahrzeit. By Linda Solomon and Bonnie Siegel to honor Joyce Rosenzweig, Cantor Rosen, and the CBSD Chorus for contributing to the spirit of the Psalms and significance of the moment as they sing for MLK Friday service. And the Oneg is sponsored by Joseph Cunin in memory of my father, Burton Cunin, in observance of his 1st yahrzeit. And tomorrow's live stream, sponsored by Naomi Gershman in memory of Cecilia Urban, CBST member and pursuer of social justice, who honored Rabbi Heschel annually on MLK weekend. Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdov. May her memory be for a blessing. And now we continue with Kiddush and Motzi. Please stand if you are able. Page 156.
יום השישי, ויחולו השמיים והארץ וכל צבאם, ויכל אלוהים ביום השביעי מלאכתו אשר עשה, וישבות ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה, ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי, ויקדש אותו, כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות. צברי חבריי וחברותיי לחיים, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו מצוותיו ורצה בנו, בשבת קודשו התחילנו זיכרון למעשה בראשית, כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת עם כל העמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון, Bye.